If you've been following women's basketball lately, you probably already feel the shift that's happening right beneath the surface. Fans are talking, agents are whispering, teams are reacting, and players, some of them big names, are quietly making decisions that could reshape the landscape of the sport. And all of this circles back to one question that's starting to surge in search trends and fan discussions. Is Project B going to disrupt the WNBA? And what does the long-term Project B WNBA impact look like? Today, we're diving deep into that storyline because early signs suggest this might be the biggest structural shakeup women's basketball has seen in a decade. While the WNBA continues to grow in ratings, attendance, star power, and investment, an entirely new league, Project B, has entered the conversation with bold promises: international reach, player-first contracts, more freedom, better pay, global marketing opportunities, cross-country exposure, and a fresh new product that's trying to position itself as the premier global league. Anytime a new challenger steps in with that type of ambition, you have to stop and ask, how much of that vision is realistic and how much can genuinely pull attention, talent, and momentum away from the WNBA? That's where the story gets interesting. Over the last few months, several WNBA players, including both established veterans and rising names, have signed on to Project B in the offseason. While this doesn't necessarily mean they're leaving the WNBA, it does signal that players are now exploring different competitive paths, different branding opportunities, and different financial models. Historically, players would head overseas to earn more during the offseason, especially in countries where salaries dwarfed traditional WNBA contracts. Project E is attempting to create a centralized, modern, global version of that, built not as a scattered overseas journey, but as a polished, media-ready league meant to rival existing systems. And because Project B is launching at the same time the WNBA is approaching its next CBA negotiations, the stakes couldn't be higher. Questions around salaries, revenue sharing, off-season restrictions, year-round player commitments, charter flights, travel conditions, and media prioritization are all in play. When a league like Project B introduces itself during a period of negotiation uncertainty, it naturally becomes leverage, pressure, or both. Even if the WNBA remains the dominant league, and that's still the likely outcome, the very existence of Project B can influence negotiations, reshape contract expectations, and push owners to invest even more aggressively. But let's look at the heart of the fan conversation. Will Project B actually pull top-tier stars away from the WNBA? Realistically, the WNBA has built a massive surge of momentum with players like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, Kelsey Plum, Nafisa Collier, and others helping catapult the league to its biggest mainstream moment ever. Visibility is at an all-time high. Ticket sales are climbing, national broadcast deals are expanding, merchandising numbers are exploding. The WNBA has become culturally relevant, not just in sports, but in entertainment, Fashion Week, advertising partnerships, college recruitment discussions, and even political and social media spaces. It would be tough for any new league, no matter how ambitious, to pull players away from that spotlight. But disruption doesn't always require extraction. Sometimes all it takes is offering an alternative, something that changes the off-season rhythm and creates new competitive pressures. Project B is also forming a product built around a boutique premium structure rather than a traditional franchise model. That means fewer teams, more control, more curated talent, and a brand identity aimed at showcasing star power rather than team continuity. Essentially, Project B is trying to sell elite global basketball entertainment rather than traditional league parity. With fewer players, they can promise more money per athlete. And that's where the Project B WNBA impact becomes more complicated. From a marketing standpoint, players love options. They love leverage. They love opportunities to grow their platform. And younger stars especially love modern, social media-driven ecosystems. Project B is betting that younger players, current rookies, NCAA stars entering the draft, and players entering their second contracts will be attracted to high-level exposure and off-season paychecks that don't force them into fatigue-heavy overseas commitments. If the league actually offers competitive pay and streamlined media support, many rising players will at least consider it. Not as a replacement for the WNBA, but as an off-season identity booster. And this matters because for decades, the WNBA has been competing not just with other U.S. leagues, but with the international basketball economy. Project B could centralize that economy and give players more control. The WNBA would still be the flagship league, but Project B could become the global off-season powerhouse, like what LIV Golf attempted to be for the PGA, or what the XFL once attempted to be for NFL-adjacent scouting. Disruption doesn't require dominance. It only requires enough gravitational pull to shift habits. But let's talk about what fans are debating most. Will Project B dilute the WNBA or strengthen it through competition? There are compelling arguments on both sides. Supporters of Project B argue that competition is healthy. If players gain more financial security, more global exposure, and more choices, the overall ecosystem of women's basketball grows. More leagues mean more storylines. More leagues mean more opportunities for players to earn a living. More leagues mean more international attention, which ultimately circles back to the WNBA when players return for the summer season. Critics, however, worry that focus is a limited resource. Too many leagues can splinter attention, confuse casual fans, stretch media bandwidth, and dilute sponsorships. If major players miss WNBA seasons due to injury, fatigue, or scheduling overlap with Project B, fans could feel the absence. And because star power is the driving force behind the WNBA's current surge, anything that affects star availability becomes a major topic of discussion. Then there's the question of longevity. New sports leagues often launch with hype, ambition, investment, and bright ideas, but they rarely survive long enough to become true competitors. The WNBA itself only survived its early years because the NBA financially supported its structure and growth. For Project B to become a real force, it needs consistent funding, broadcast deals, partnerships, and global stability. Even then, a new league has to build culture, storytelling, rivalries, history, and fan identity, things the WNBA already has. And that's why the WNBA still sits atop the pyramid. But Project B doesn't need to dethrone the WNBA to be influential. It only needs to exist with enough momentum to influence salary structures, contract negotiations, and player expectations for years to come. And that's the true long-term storyline. How much power will Project B hold over the evolution of women's basketball? If it gains traction, it could force the WNBA to accelerate changes it was already planning, such as expanding the league, increasing player salaries, expanding charter flights, or raising investment thresholds for team owners. Competition has a way of speeding up growth. As we look into the future, the reality is simple. The WNBA isn't going anywhere, and its momentum is too strong to be undone by a newcomer. But Project B is tapping into a rising global hunger for women's basketball content, and fans are more open than ever to new platforms. With NCAA women's basketball drawing record-breaking ratings and new stars emerging annually, the global ecosystem is expanding fast. That's why this conversation matters, because whether Project B becomes a major force or just a seasonal showcase, the effect on athletes, contracts, economics, and fan culture will be felt. The Project B WNBA impact may turn out to be one of the most important storylines of the next decade, not for how it challenges the WNBA, but for how it reshapes player power in a sport that's climbing higher every single year.